Your stories don't define you. How you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and chief story maker of Elkins Consulting. We share stories for many reasons, to persuade, to entertain, and to connect. But what we sometimes forget is the impact of the stories we tell ourselves. Whether you're sharing personal stories or business stories, how you share them makes a difference in how you remember them and in how you're being perceived by the people you're sharing them with. Sometimes it's hard to figure out which stories to share, whether it's difficult bosses, coworkers, successes, failures. But the harder part is figuring out how you share them. Most of the time, it's best to figure out your patterns using those stories. In this series, you'll hear stories that will resonate with you, you'll nod your head in understanding, and then we'll dig into the lessons from each of them. During this podcast, I'm asking you to listen and consider your related stories, to listen and think about which stories in your life might have impacted you in a similar way. Ashley Horner, welcome to Your Stories Don't Define You, but How You Tell Them Will, my podcast. I'm so glad to have you here. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
So Ashley Horner, just for our listeners, has a recruitment firm, but she also has a couple of nonprofits that she works with, Anchored Souls and Anchored Kids. And we'll talk about those organizations later on in the podcast. And I'll have lots of links for you in the associated blog post with this podcast on my website, elkinsconsulting.com. So Ashley, the way I always start these interviews, in order to give our listeners a little introduction to you and make them feel like they know something about you and feel connected with you, tell us something that most people wouldn't know about you, something they wouldn't find on your resume, you haven't necessarily blogged about, something kind of different.
Actually, it's pretty simple. I love to cook. Like it's, if I have the time, a Sunday afternoon after I've gone grocery shopping and I have a ton of food available where I can just start getting creative and just cook like crazy. And alongside of that, I enjoy entertaining my family. So it just seems natural that anytime I can feed my kids or my family, come on over and let's just eat. And I just absolutely love the opportunity to try new things, get creative. I really don't follow recipes, so I just like to get a little crazy, some music, some quiet time, and that's my sanity. That's my solace.
Really, that doesn't really surprise me that much. I didn't know that. I haven't seen that in any of your writing. But the reason it doesn't surprise me is there's something about feeding people and nourishing them beyond the calories they're ingesting that fits with everything I know about you so far. So
yeah, I guess
I'm not
true.
Surprised by it. I am a little surprised about the no recipes, but I shouldn't be, because as we talked about before I hit that record button, we're both a little on the impulsive side. So I don't think impulsive people really use recipes very much.
Who's got time for that, right?
Exactly. Well, thank you. That is definitely something that I'll have to add into the blog post somewhere. And if you have something in particular, an ingredient you like to work with, or a particular dish you like to make to share, maybe you could send some information about it, a pinch of this, a pinch of that, since you don't use a recipe. Maybe we can.
And always a pinch of love, right?
Of course. Well, usually it's at least a few cups of that. And there's always more when I'm having a glass of wine while I'm cooking.
Right. Absolutely.
So let's just dive in. I'm fascinated by everything that you've been talking about in LinkedIn, and really grateful to Jennifer McGinley for introducing us. But let's start with some story about something from your past, particularly maybe in your young adulthood, that you believe is a pivot point to what you're doing now. One of those first things that happened, a conversation, a specific adventure experience that maybe you didn't know it at the time, but now you look back and think, oh yeah, that's part of why I see the world the way I do.
Yeah, so there's, it's coupled with my daughter, who is a product of sexual abuse and a suicide attempt. So it really is the combination of the two. And, part of that the suicide attempt was because of the abuse that I experienced for so long, and for, since I was a young girl until I was old enough to have a child at 20. The bottom line is that I had taken all of that pain and I didn't really do anything with it, and I just kind of squashed it down. So it was very much like a pressure cooker, if you will, that I was constantly not dealing with all of the previous hurts. And so I just pushed it down, and we're led to believe that we have to be strong and that we don't have to show our emotions, just squash all that down. And then when, I failed in my suicide attempt, I literally had to figure out how I was going to manage through my adversity and how I was going to face my adversity, build my toolkit, and really being able to survive and turning that into thriving. And it took me a long time, but I finally figured it out. It's just but that right there was my pivotal moment. And that's not to say that I didn't struggle for years after. I mean, there were moments that it was like, God, why am I doing this? But I made the conscious effort to keep getting up. And that's part of my mantra, that, it's keep getting up, keep facing the daily stuff, if it's the hurts, if it's the difficult times. But that was it. That was my pivotal moment, quite frankly.
So are you specifically talking about when you woke up after the suicide attempt? Or when you found out you were pregnant?
So it was literally after the suicide attempt, and realizing that I needed to, quite frankly, just get it together. I needed to figure out how to get through this pain.
Was someone else there that was kind of a person that you would have conversations with, or did something happen maybe within, I'm just curious, like were you in a hospital when you woke up from that?
I was. And so to this day, I have this visual of my dad patting my hand as I woke up, saying I had done something very wrong. Being raised Orthodox Catholic, that's of course a sin. So you don't dare commit suicide. And so when I woke up to that, there is the one thing that I always struggle with is disappointing anyone, but particularly my parents. And so, yeah. And my dad was just like, he was my buddy. I was really close to him. And, he just, when he described, I could just see it in his eyes. I could see the hurt in his eyes. I could see how he was just holding my hand and patting my hand. I mean, we weren't really that warm fuzzies.
Yeah,
that just wasn't us. We weren't ever affectionate, but we were always like, I grew up calling him buddy, like, hey buddy. I didn't really call him dad. And so when I saw that look in his eyes, it said everything. And from that moment on, it was like, I've got to figure this out. And plus I had children that I had my children that depended on me. And I just needed to figure it out.
So I have this incredible visual in my head now of a young woman kind of beaten down, bruised inside and out. And this gentle father that isn't normally so gentle or affectionate, touching her hand like that. And I can feel that.
Mm-hmm.
That is definitely a pivot point. And my guess is that even at that moment, even though you knew you had to change something, my guess is that it wasn't till much later that you had that visual come back to you to remind you of why you were pushing through. Why am I trying so hard?
Yeah, it has come back to me many times over. It definitely, my dad is still here with us. We've since lost my mom, but there's this thing about my dad. It's like, I want to make my dad proud. It's like, he was there. He saw what I had gone through. He helped me through that very moment. I'm not going to say that it was so much moving forward. I mean, he's always been a part of my support system, but that very moment where he literally held my hand in both of his hands and just patted it, it was just, it was heartwarming. It gave me strength for a moment, and then it was like, everything broke loose from there.
Right.
But then, as time progressed, yeah, I've definitely held on to that visual. And as I heard you describing it, it actually brings tears to my eyes, because I can't imagine as a parent what that would have felt like.
Wouldn't want to. And
No.
I wouldn't want you to.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, I feel that way too. I have a 19-year-old and a 17-year-old, and Helena here in Montana is very well known for its high rate of suicide, particularly among teens. And every time I hear another teen has committed suicide from our little town, it's a little town, I just imagine their parents. And I say to my children, we would sit at the dining room table and I would just start crying. I don't have any hesitation to share how I'm feeling. And it's not about guilt. It's about exposing that level of vulnerability so my kids know that it's okay. And my husband does it too, not quite as visually as I do. But I remember so many times, unfortunately, so many times when my kids were in high school, that I would say, tell me our relationship is different. Because that mother thought she had a good relationship with her child, good enough that this wouldn't happen, that the unthinkable would happen to her kid. So tell me why our relationship is different. And we would have these really intense and awesome conversations about it. So that leads me into your newest endeavor, Anchored Kids, partly because I have a feeling that when you are working with these kids and training people to work with kids, that hand on another hand is a big part of how you imagine things to be.
So Anchored Kids, to take it even a step further, being a part of my story, is that I literally became a full-time grandparent overnight. And it was a struggle, as from a standpoint of oh my gosh, what do you do? Like, where do you turn? Where do you find resources? And there aren't any. How do we sign up for school? We can't. We don't have the legal right. But from the kid standpoint, the ultimate goal with that is I want to go across the country and even global, because it is a global problem that there are children who are being raised by extended family members. And I want children to have a sense of normalcy. And so every time we take my granddaughter to a playground, she consistently is faced with the same question: where's your mommy? Where's your daddy? And she gets to point and say, well, I live with my grandmoms and my uncle. I mean, she like puts it out there, and that's her norm. But then she's in the midst of all these children that have their moms and dads standing around the playground, right? So it literally dawned on me, it's like, I want to give these children a sense of normalcy where they get a weekend away or a week away, where they can go to a camp and just be in the norm. And, potentially have, counseling available, and just having the awareness that they're in a space that, that is kind of safe, so they're not faced with that question of where's your mommy, where's your daddy, because she doesn't know.
Right.
She's
and
4 years old.
Potential
Exactly.
judgment as a result of it.
Being
or
singled
bias.
out. Yeah, being singled out. And so that's the ultimate goal. But on the flip side of that, to provide that hand, to lend a hand to the caregivers, the kinship, caregivers that are, just at a loss. Your life is completely turned upside down. It's no longer what we once knew. We were empty nesters for 2 weeks.
Oh,
2 weeks. So, you suddenly are now looking down the road of, my gosh, retirement is never going to happen. Who's going to stay with her? Who's going to, how do you take care of the medical, healthcare? Like, what do you do? So it's providing resources for that, for for the caregivers as
Mm-hmm.
well. So absolutely, it's about, again, the whole, how do we care for these kids? How do we make it better for the kids?
One of the byproducts of this idea of working with the kids to make sure they feel connected and anchored, so to speak, but not anchored.
Right.
The whole byproduct that I was just flashing on is that when they spend time with other kids that are in similar circumstances, they'll develop a sense of self, a sense of identity that will give them the strength to explain to other people that this is their normal without getting defensive, without feeling like they have to defend where they are, and give them a foundation to teach others, to be able to bring that level of understanding to other children on the playground, to be able to say, yeah, those are my grandmas.
Mm-hmm.
And be confident enough not to worry about teasing, or being able to address it in a way that's productive and effective. You say, if they get teased, being able to say, well, actually, I understand that you're threatened by that, and sorry about that. Being able to give them those tools to address it. And the reason that popped into my head is my husband and I raised 2 Jewish boys in a little town with very few Jews, and some serious bigotry, anti-Semitism, but most of it is ignorant anti-Semitism. It's simply that people haven't been exposed to it, so they don't understand it, and so they have certain stereotypes and predispositions toward weirdness about Judaism. And I remember vividly going to the school when my boys were in 2nd grade and kindergarten. And I was talking to one of the teachers, and she was one of the most open of exposing the students to different cultures and experiences. And I had been going every year since my older one had been in kindergarten. So this is my 3rd year, going in at Christmas time to explain the story of Hanukkah. And I avoid any kind of religious discussion when it comes to that. It's really about culture and tradition anyway. I don't consider myself a religious person. So I would explain the story of Hanukkah, and I'd bring dreidels, and I'd tell them how to play dreidel. And then every year I would get these specially made small donuts with jelly in them. And in Israel, they're called sufganiyot, which is jelly donuts, and that's what they eat at Hanukkah time. They go through millions of them in the 8 days of Hanukkah. And I would bring one for every kid. And I will never forget, I overheard at the playground the week before Hanukkah, one kid teasing my older son about being Jewish and not celebrating Christmas. It was 1 week before I did my presentations. And Jacob, because he had built this foundation, this confidence, he just said, you don't have to feel bad for me for not celebrating Christmas. I really like my celebration of Hanukkah, and you're going to like it too when my mom comes and talks about it.
Oh, that's cool.
And it was like, I overheard this. I know I wasn't expected or intended to overhear it. I happened to be standing behind a barrier, so they didn't see me. And I remember thinking, this is why I'm doing this, because he has the confidence to describe it and not get angry as a result of this ignorance being thrown at him.
And it provides awareness.
Mm-hmm, exactly. So I'm guessing that you have had experiences like that with your granddaughter on the playground. Do you have any specific stories that kind of go along that theme?
Yeah, it's, when we went through this with my own children as well, because they were being raised by 2 women. So it literally has then, life coming full circle with my granddaughter, where she is saying the same thing. Now, we're 20 years later, so,
a little different, I would hope.
the pasture's kind of changed a little bit. Landscape of that has changed a little bit, yes. But still, there's going to be, that prejudice. And, there's, like I said, there's been times where I will overhear her specifically saying, I live with my grandmas, and she will point. When we start to have that conversation with her that, she doesn't have to explain that, she shows pride. It's not like she's defending herself. She truly shows pride. Now, keep in mind, she is only 4. So I'm really curious to see how that's going to translate when she's a little older. But right now, we're in the space where she just like the way her body language, everything, she's like happy and proud to say, I live with my grandmas and my uncle. I mean, I know it sounds like a comedy show, you know, two lesbians, a gay boy, and a granddaughter. We are probably one of the most diverse households you'd ever want to hear about. But really, it's quite heartwarming to know that she's accepted that. That's what she knows, and it's her norm. And it kind of makes it appear that, you know what, you have that mommy and you have that daddy, and you're the odd one because this is my world. Yeah. So no, it's really awesome. That's the kind of stuff when we hear those sort of things and we see that, that's when you look at it and you say, wow, this is all very hard, but it's also very worth it.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it gives you a little comfort when you hear your granddaughter say something like that, because you think, okay, we're doing all right so far. And every time I have an interaction with my children, I wonder if I'm doing the right thing. Did I say that right? Did I hurt his feelings? Did I put too much pressure on him? I mean, it's always that. So to be able to hear those words and see those expressions and see the responses of the people around them who love your child for everything she is, there's something really comforting about that.
You say that, and that brings up a story. We had taken her into the city. And the city is full of life. It's one of the reasons that we like to go. And a couple weekends ago, as we were walking, there were 3 young women who were just full of life. You could just tell they were loving life. They had a zest for life. They had some music going. They're dancing down the streets, just having a really good time. My granddaughter, for some reason, she just really just off the bat connected with them. She starts dancing. For the next 45 minutes, we hung out with these young women, and it's because she was comfortable enough in her own skin. Now, I could be describing a lot of other children, but she was comfortable enough in her own skin that she was able to spend the time with them and dance with them, and they were teaching her how to do certain dances, and she just loved it. But then the flip side of that was, all those young ladies had to say was, oh my gosh, we love her. Like, we have boys. Can we take her home? You know, she's just, but, you know, to hear that, yeah, there are hard days. Yes, we do have our struggles with her. But when you hear something like that, and she's truly enjoying life and she's showing that zest for life, it's like, yeah, we're doing okay. We're doing okay. And then the next day comes and something totally blows up, and then you're like, we're really screwing this up.
just lost the Grandmother of the Year award again.
That's it. Yep, like every other day.
Yeah, I've lost the Mother of the Year award on a daily basis, but
yeah,
what struck me was that you could be describing any other little girl, except that you're not, and you're describing a little girl that has, over the past couple years of her life, experienced some trauma that she will have to address later on. But at this point, the fact that she can live the way she does comfortably in her skin is a big deal. And it is a tribute to the way her grandmothers and uncle are behaving around her and making her normal a healthy normal. So yeah, you could be talking about any little girl, but you're not.
Well, and the honestly, when we talk about Anchor Kids, the extension of this is that so much needs to change. And this is not just about, yes, let's get a camp for the kids. I absolutely want to do that. I absolutely want to set up a roadmap so that, the extended families are able to have the resources available to them to know what steps to take when life changes all of a sudden. Here they have a child or children. It could be a number of reasons. It doesn't have to be anything negative. It could be lost in combat. Parents, suffer from some disease. It could be a number of reasons that you become this parent, or are all of a sudden in this parental role. But the backstory to this is, you know, there are so many resources available to family members that, or not family members, but to people that do take on children through fostering them or adopting them. You know, if you foster a child, you receive financial assistance. If you adopt a child, you receive financial assistance. You are then given the opportunity to turn to those resources. So my question is, why do we not offer that sort of help when we are essentially, we or any other, you know, family members that are taking on these children, it is not now the burden of the state, of the government, because the family has made the conscious decision, the choice to say, yes, I will be responsible. I will take this child on. Why would we not offer help to those people for doing the right thing? It's almost as if you're punished because you have agreed to take this child. But yet, if they're in the system, you know, because that's what we've done. We've kept our granddaughter out of the system. And there are a lot of people who have made that choice. But when you start turning statistics or looking at the statistics, I think it's like 75% of, you know, the family members that have chosen to take this on are at poverty level or close to it. So that's the extension of why I want to do this, because it's building the awareness of why are we not providing, you know, hey, government, why are we not providing the assistance to these families?
Well, and I think the reality has to be put forward with all government assistance when it comes to the care of our children. I'm not talking about adults. I'm talking about children. When we talk about government assistance, it's not about giving money to somebody and putting them on welfare or anything like that. What we're doing, in effect, when we assist children in their environments, whether we're feeding them, putting them through school, making sure they have a good school and good foundation when it comes to early education, what we're doing is we're preventing them from ending up in the system later. So As much as it's the right thing to do, because it's the right thing to do to feed and nourish the children in our communities, even if we don't like the parents, the more we feed and nourish the children in our communities, our neighbors, the less we're going to have to spend in private prisons in a decade, when that's where they're going to end up if we don't. And we want our society and our communities to be healthy and well, with very little crime and very little poverty, but we're not going to have that if we don't do something about it at those young ages. And I think that's where the disconnect happens. It's not about government assistance. The government's going to come in and save us. It's really about, where are we investing our dollars?
Well, that's exactly right, because there are statistics around the emotional and behavioral problems that children do suffer when they find themselves in this situation. I mean, the fact is, for us, you know, my granddaughter knows her mom and knows that just 2 years ago she was living with her mom. So when we lose the Grandmother of the Year award and we've disciplined her and she's really upset with us, she wants to go back to mommy's. You know, so that's a tough pill to swallow, but that's part of the emotion that we have to work through, and the counseling that is absolutely going to be necessary. You know, so that's absolutely true. Everything that you say there is absolutely true, that, you know, we are helping the child, you know, not just handing money over to the families, but to be able to provide those resources to the children.
So one more story I want to hear from you. I have a feeling there's a story in you about the particular recruitment themes that you have in your business. And it's a pretty specialized recruitment company, I would say, especially, I mean, I talked to a lot of recruiters, and it's been interesting over the last few years of meeting really awesome people who are recruiters for really specific reasons. And it's out of compassion and care and advocacy for people. And all my experience prior to meeting the people that are like our last podcast episode was a couple of recruiters from Next Op Search. And I'm talking to you, and I've spoken to a couple of others. All of my experience prior to this with recruiters has not been so positive.
Yeah.
So I have had my eyes opened by Adam Karpiak and a few others that are my LinkedIn contacts. And you in particular right now, I love what your focus is, because that is an area of our community that is sadly neglected. So what is the story behind it? What happened to you or to somebody you love that really awakened you to this need?
Bottom line, my son is in the Air Force. He was in a tragic car accident. And when I received the call to make me aware of that accident, when I found out how bad it was, I took off and drove up to New Jersey. When I got there, I wasn't there but for a couple hours, and I got a phone call. I got a phone call from my manager saying, "So when will you be returning? We have an important regional sales meeting, and I want to make sure that you're going to be there." Now, what she didn't know is that I had found out on my drive up to New Jersey that my son had a skull fracture and had a brain bleed. And honestly, I thought she was calling because she was interested to know what was going on with my son, and that was not the case at all. So I kind of had to put her in time out and just tell her that I was here to take care of my son and that I would address that at a later time. I did not know. And at that point, it was just like I dealt with taking care of my son, but then because his injuries that he had sustained were so incredibly bad, he did have to come home and be cared for. Brought him home. I went to, I was definitely communicative with my manager at the time and next level up. And the bottom line, it turned out to be where it was like, look, I want to work, but I also have to be a mom. I have to take care of my son. And so here's what I would like to propose. And so I proposed that I work from home, still do the same job. There was no reason that I could not do my job from home and still take care of my son. I could do both. We're moms. We're resilient. We do everything, right?
Right. Not the first time.
Right. So there was no reason in my mind that I shouldn't be able to do this. And I was actually told no. And so I had a really hard choice to make. And that choice was, do I want to really go on FMLA? I didn't want to. And so I kind of turned it around back to my manager and I said, look, I understand that as an employee, I'm your one FTE that fills this spot. And I really want to give you what you need. I was in a 100% sales role at the time. You need the sales to continue. I can do that. If I go on FMLA, which would be up to 26 weeks because my son is in the Air Force, and that's the right that you have as, military parent. The problem is that you lose momentum, and I had a lot of momentum going at that same time. So I was really trying to put a positive spin on why this would be a win-win for both of us. Still turned down. And I did take it a step further, and I went to VP. He literally said to me in the presence of my manager, I actually was embarrassed for my manager at the time, but he said to me, absolutely, of course you can. There was not even a discussion. It was like, hey, this is what I would like to do. I presented it to him, and the response was, absolutely, of course you can. He turned around and he said, the minute that we lose compassion, it's time to close the books.
Oh, I love him. Right? This man. Can we get his name? I want to put his name up in lights.
He was awesome.
Beautiful.
He was awesome. And I was like, absolutely, made a great point. But I lost so much respect. And I was like, look, you hear so much about micromanagement and the control and all that kind of stuff. But the bottom line is that I wanted to just do the right thing for both my career and for my son. And I will tell you, anytime that something comes up, my family's always going to come first. So
God, I hope so.
Yeah. So I just didn't understand as a mom herself why she just didn't get it. And I hope to God she's never put in that position, because it was hard. I was always a career woman. I was always in a space where it was like my career was part of who I was. It was my makeup. So when that happened, and then literally a little over, well, actually about a year and a half later, a colleague of mine was in need of a kidney. And so I don't know, he needed a kidney. I had two, so I decided to give him one. And
Wow.
so I donated my kidney to this colleague. And at that point, there was a comment that she had made to me, she being my manager. And I just decided this is just not the place for me anymore. There's a level of humanness, there's compassion that I have, the person that I am, my values, if I stay here, and my morals and what I stand for go out the window. And I just could not do that anymore.
Mm-mm. You know, what's really sad about that, there's so many things sad about that, but the first thing that makes me so sad about it is that the VP knew this about this manager.
Yeah.
He was fully aware, and I don't know if he did anything, but it sounds to me like he never worked with her or invited her to be his mentee. He could mentor her, because clearly he had the right mindset when it came to human experience in a human workplace. And it makes me a little sad that as much as I love him for what he said, he knew this about her. And so he lost you, who was clearly a go-getter, an awesome and compassionate employee, and somebody who's willing to go to bat for her employer and colleagues. He lost you instead of this other woman who is going to continue to do what she's doing until she gets some coaching. And that's what I find most tragic about the whole situation.
Well, I hear you, but the end game or end story, the end of that story is that the VP has since left and she's still there. So, so we all left the manager. So
how sad. Again, it's still tragic because
absolutely.
And I guess the reason I say that is we started this whole conversation about helping people, about our compassion for people, every person, even this manager who clearly has a little issue, a control issue. She's threatened by you in some way, whatever it is. And when both of you leave, instead of addressing her, then all three of you lose just a tiny bit. I mean, the reality is that it was exactly the right thing to happen at exactly the right time for you. And so we can say, well, yeah, this is why this worked out the way it did. At the same time, if we can, in this conversation, encourage somebody to speak up and go to this manager who could be a good manager given the right coaching or circumstance, and hopefully somebody will learn that lesson as they're listening to this conversation. But in the meantime, let's get back to you and what happened after that.
So I literally went and, after my recovery from my kidney donation, I had ultimately decided that I was not going to be going back to that manager. And I did identify a new position with a new company, which I was pretty excited about. I get into that company and I started, and 2 weeks later, that's when I became a full-time grandparent.
Oh,
that's when the hard decision had to be made. What do we do? One of us had to stay home. And I had been talking about, I was just wrecked. I was just totally wrecked after that last experience with the manager. And I finally just said, let's do this. Let's just take the leap of faith. I've been in this industry for years. You can't tell me that I can't do something about it. And so my initial vision was that I wanted to help, two very much needed communities as far as how we could help them in the recruitment space. And in the recruitment space, I recognized some gaps, and some of which I had lived personally. And then on the other side of that, it was, the connection with my son in the military. And what did that look like? And so literally it was absolutely necessary that we had to make a hardcore decision. I couldn't just sit home and be the stay-at-home grandmom, because I wasn't ever a stay-at-home mom. So I needed to do something. I was a career woman. What is that going to look like? And so then the higher group was born. And, I didn't know what the heck I was doing. I had no idea what I was doing. I had all these visions of what the perfect company was going to look like. And then here I am, almost 2 years into it. And what I thought it was going to look like is very different. I literally have become, over the last 21 months, almost 2 years now, have become this serial entrepreneur where just these ideas just keep coming. And it's like, I need to do this and I need to do that. And you get varying opinions. Set your sights on one thing, focus on that, get really good at that, and then do your next thing. And then the other side of that is, as an entrepreneur, you have 10 different things going on, and you work them, and whatever doesn't work out, you throw it out the window and you do something new. And that's exactly what has happened to me. And finally, as an entrepreneur, I really finally feel like, God, I love this. I loved my career. I'm not a recruiter. I'll be the first one to say, I am not a recruiter. I own a recruitment firm. And people laugh at me, but I will tell you, I hate recruiting because it's not what I'm good at. I'm good at operations. I'm good at coming up with ideas. I'm good at treating people like they matter. So our tagline with the higher group is bringing back the humans, because it's about people. And that's where it feels good to me. That's where I want to make the difference. So when I created the higher group, it was, where do I want to focus? And it was very specific to the military family, because I see value in the whole military family unit. How can we assist them? What pain point do we need to focus on? And what gaps are out there? So we focus on that. And then from a standpoint of, the being a diverse certified recruiting firm, putting the attention and filling the gap in for the LGBTQ community. I mean, it's what I live and breathe. Being in the LGBTQ community, I know the struggles. I understand how difficult it is to be sitting in an interview and somebody says, so you're relocating. How does your husband feel about that? But I have a wife back at home, and how in the heck am I supposed to answer that question? Do I tell them? Do I not tell them? What if they don't accept that? What's okay, what's not? And so we help the LGBTQ community, navigate through those types of questions. And then we also have vetted, companies that we know are accepting of the culture. So we're sending our candidates to safe places, safe spaces, if you will, that they're going to be comfortable and just can be who they are.
Wow. That's a pretty incredible mission right there. And all of the different aspects of what you're doing with Anchored Souls, Anchored Kids, and Higher One is they all work together. I mean, it's not like these are all different communities, because the reality is that all of them can be in all of those communities. So I love that. And it feels true, because it all fits with your ultimate goal of just that humanity and connecting and nourishing people.
Well, I think beyond that, it's, when somebody talks about Ashley Horn, what does she stand for? What's her buzzword? My buzzword is very simple. It's adversity. And I had to get through a lot of adversity to get to where I am today. And gosh, we're always going to face adversity in our lives. Always. There is no one person that can say, oh yeah, it was easy all the way through life. But what I am attempting to do with all three areas is truly build strength through the adversity that people face. And in every area, through the higher group, Anchored Souls, Anchored Kids, everybody's facing adversity through either, identifying employment, or if they've experienced very specific traumatic, situations in their lives, through Anchored Souls, and then Anchored Kids, as we just talked about at length. So it's, how do we build your toolkit so that you can navigate through that process, so that we can build you up so that you can do this on your own. Right now, I'm going to help you build that resource. I'm going to help you build that toolkit. But in every area, it's being able to help each person so that they can do it on their own. And that's ultimately the goal.
That's a pretty big goal.
I'm a dreamer.
Yeah. Well, the reality is that, as we kind of talked about at the very beginning of this conversation, it often takes just one person to make that difference. And you can be that person because you had that person. And even though your dad wasn't affectionate and wasn't the person offering all those resources, the fact is he was there at that moment when you needed him most. And he's that visual of his hand on yours is what drives you to be a good person and honestly pay it forward, which is basically what we're saying here. So I love this because you are that person, but even more so because you are helping other people to be that person for others. And that's where the real impact is going to be. You can only touch so many lives, but in all of those lives that you touch, it's an exponential increase because then they can be that person for others. So thank you for what you do.
Absolutely. I'll tag on to that one of the things that has been very shocking to me is that since I released the video yesterday about my launching Anchored Kids, the responsiveness that I have received from that has been phenomenal. I'm getting private messages. How can I help? How can I help? And I always say this, who doesn't want to help a dog or a child? But it's just, you're absolutely right. I know that me as one person, I might be able to just kind of spearhead these different projects. But if what I constantly am saying is, if I am able to just touch one person and make a difference for one person, and they're able to then pass that on, it's going to grow. So yes, absolutely. I want to make an impact for so many people in so many different ways, be it through my motivational speaking, life coaching, spearheading these different projects. Absolutely, I want to continue to do that. And I want people to be able to speak up for themselves and to be able to speak to the types of resources that are out there and available.
And it comes right back to how you described your granddaughter, that she is comfortable in her skin. And I really believe that the more people can be comfortable in their own skin, the better our communities will be. Just straight up. Because if you're comfortable in your skin, then you're a lot more likely to be comfortable with other people who choose to be comfortable in their skin.
And so, I'll share this with you. I honestly cannot say that I was 100% comfortable in my skin until I no longer reported to someone else. Like, I can truly be who I am. It took me almost 50 years to say, this is who I am and it's okay. It took me that long, but I didn't have to answer to somebody else. Like, it's my morals, it's my values, it's my standards. And I know that at the end of the day, I'm able to look in the mirror and say, I'm okay with who I am and what I do. And as long as I can continue to do that at the end of every single day, then I know I'm in a good space. But I was not comfortable in my own skin until almost 2 years ago.
I hadn't heard that before. But what it says to me is that it's possible for anyone. It doesn't matter how old you are. I would rather it start at 16, 15, because it seems to me that we're comfortable in our skin generally as kids until we're, 6 or 8, particularly girls. Boys probably last a little longer before they start questioning themselves and doubting themselves. But I would love to be able to see more people, particularly women, but men as well, be comfortable in their skin at younger ages. And I think what you're doing, not only with your Anchored Souls and Anchored Kids, but also your recruitment firm, is that you are giving them the confidence to be comfortable in their skin much earlier than either of us found that comfort. So again, it's just another added benefit to what you're providing in terms of nourishing the souls that you're communicating with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the reality for me. And I'm sad that it took me so long, because I think, my gosh, what could it have been if I was able to find that comfort, years ago?
I used to go there too. I stopped beating myself up about that about 3 years ago, when my friend so I was about 45-ish, and I was telling my friend who was 70 something, early 70s, who is a tennis coach and totally go-getter. I said something to her about that. Well, I'm a little sad that it took me so long to get to this point to find my voice. And she said, you found it in exactly the way and the time you were supposed to find it. So you weren't ready before. And I thought, oh my gosh, that is so true, because if I had found my voice earlier, I wouldn't have had the experience with some of my awful bosses that taught me so much, not just about myself, but about the world around me. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I get that. I get that little slight tinge of, man, I wish I had known this earlier.
No, but you're spot on. I am a firm believer that everything falls in line the way that it's supposed to, and call it the moon, the stars are lining up, the universe, your gods, whatever it is that you believe in. Mm-hmm. This is the way it was supposed to happen. And it's something that I often refer to when, people talk to me about all of the adversity that I had faced. I mean, my story is just brutally dark when you just look at the tidbits: being abandoned as a child, being abused by my biological parents, and then, becoming an orphan myself, going into then a wonderful family, to only then be sexually molested for almost 10 years. Oh. And then having a daughter as a result of that. And then moving into a marriage where there was domestic violence, and then the suicide attempt, and then my son's accident, and then my stepdaughter being an addict. And, so you hear all of these stories, but the bottom line is that, I literally had to turn it around to say, okay, all this happened to me for a reason. And why? Mm-hmm. Because I'm supposed to do something with it. Because there's no way that all of this could have happened to one person just because. And I had an aunt say to me a long time ago, she said, the reason it happened to you is because God knew that you were strong enough to handle it. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know that I believe that.
Right.
But what I do believe many years later is that as I looked at it, and I think the final straw for me was when the gentleman that I donated my kidney to, he tragically died.
Oh.
Months after he received my kidney. He died of a heart attack, so it wasn't even his kidney.
Oh, heartbreaking.
Yeah. And it was like, come on. Like, seriously, come on.
You give me this?
Right. Like, I'm trying to do something nice here. And I love this man. He was awesome. I fell in love with his family. They were just great. And I was like, this really sucks. And now yet there's something else that we've added to the component of adversity. And like I said, I just finally said, I couldn't have gone through all that and not do something with this. And so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to share my story. And so that's how Anchored Souls came about. But absolutely, we are all supposed to be at certain points in our lives for whatever reason that we may not know. But I'm just trying to turn the bad stuff into good stuff.
Mm-hmm. And I think generally we don't know what our legacy is. We will never know it because we die before we could actually know what our legacy is, the impact that we had. We may have some little hints about it, but I just don't believe that we really know it. And some of it is our own lack of confidence and awareness to imagine that we could have the impact that we might have. But
I think that, since I've really started to kick off with Anchored Souls and Anchored Kids, I really started to see what impact I could have. Like, I may not ever see it to the full extent, but I do believe that I am starting to see the possibilities. So I do think that we can see, the beginnings of where I can actually have impact and change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This has been a great, inspiring conversation, and I know that we could talk for a lot longer.
Of course. Yeah.
As Jennifer would say, we have the gift of gab, but it's part of who we are. And for a long time, I fought that. In 7th grade, I decided to be the quiet girl, and that didn't work out very well for me. But it's one of those things that we either have to embrace or change. And I've chosen to embrace it. And that's why I love doing this podcasting.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much for joining me today, Ashley. It's really been a pleasure. And for those listeners catching in now, I will have an associated blog post with this with links to Ashley's 3 organizations that she runs, and maybe a couple of extra special links for you to enjoy later on. So thank you again, Ashley. Really appreciate your time.
I thank you.
Thank you for listening to Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Share Them Will. Please visit my website for more podcast episodes, blog posts, and information about how I can help you develop and share your stories at elkinsconsulting.com. Now listen to